case. And whatever happened to those days when a man could earn a day's pay with a good workhorse? Well, they're still here. Good evening. I'm Bill Misley. Welcome once again to Vantage Point. You know, in times of threatening recession, it's difficult to deal with the loss of a job and a weekly income. When families are going hungry, it's hard to watch tax dollars being spent on research and development. It seems that a research investment never pays off. Well, that's not the case in our next segment. In Washington County, the left hand is beginning to feed the right hand. Technology learned in the lab is now being applied to clam flats in 6 towns down east. Diminishing productivity has led local clamming associations to develop the first ever commercial soft-shell clam hatchery. Inside a small shack on this Beals Island wharf, the seeds are being developed for the next generation.
Clamming in Washington County is a $4.5 to $5 million industry a year, just to clam diggers alone. 44 to 45% of all clams harvested in the state of Maine come from Washington County. However, the stocks have been dwindling and the price has been increasing. If the clam diggers in Washington County are to survive, they must find a way to keep their flats full of clams. The towns of Addison, Jonesport, Beals, Jonesboro, Roke's Bluff, and Machiasport have decided enough is enough. After years of struggling with size restrictions and other management strategies, they have decided it's time to take control of their own destiny. This union of 6 towns has pooled $500 each and donated it to a commercial clam hatchery in hopes that the hatchery can replenish the clam stocks in their towns.
I asked each town to contribute $500 to this project, and each town wanted to know what their guarantee would be. Our goal was 1 million clams for each of the 6 towns. So we needed to raise 6 million clams. They said, what guarantee do we have? And I said, not one clam. I can't guarantee you 1 clam.
Beal was just another researcher in a long line of researchers that have run headlong into skepticism.
And the reason is because, you know, there's been so much tried that didn't work. And everybody's just negative. You know, they say, well, you know, they're doing this for nothing.
What's at stake for the towns is hopefully an economic benefit. And that's what the whole project is geared for, is to produce clams to seed flats so that clam diggers can make more money. I mean, that's as simple as I can put it.
Well, I have hopes that seeding, the hatching and seeding of these clams in the future will build up the resource so that instead of maybe working 1 or 2 days a week, we'll be able to work maybe 5 days a week.
Right now, in this particular flat, a fella could come down and probably get a half a bushel on a 4-hour tide. And if this works, you know, it should be so that, you know, he could get a bushel and a half, make a day's pay at it.
The Maine-New Hampshire Sea Grant Program started the ball rolling back as early as 1976. At that time, it funded a project to spawn soft-shell clams at the University of Maine's Darling Center. The man behind the research, Sam Chapman.
At that time, I was told you might as well take a 2-week vacation to try to raise clams because it can't be done. And I took that as a personal challenge. And that summer we raised, in the next 3 or 4 weeks, 6 million clams. In 1980 and 81, we had a 5-town project which went from Jonesboro all the way down to Wells, Maine. In 1983 and 84, I became involved in a clam 4-H clam hatchery project down in Jonesboro.
These projects succeeded and stirred interest to pursue the technology on a larger scale. It ultimately led Brian Beal, a Washington County native, to numerous grant organizations and the Jonesboro area for a large-scale application of Chapman's technology. In a simplified form, this is the spawning cycle of the clam in the mudflats. On a seasonal scale, clams spend the winter months in a slow-growing state. The waters are cold and somewhat deficient in food. However, in the spring, the waters begin to warm and algae begins to bloom. The clams begin to eat and grow. This growing spurt stimulates the reproductive process.
What usually happens is you get 1 or 2 males releasing sperm out of 100 clams. You're going to have 2 males release. And along with the sperm release are hormones that are carried along in the water that trigger other males to release sperm, and eventually this triggers the females to release the eggs. This is what we call a gregarious spawning response. This happens in the mudflats. What we do is step in when the clams are just beginning to get ready to spawn, take the adult clams from the clam flats, bring them in, wash them off, and we put dozens, at times several hundreds at a time, into trays with clean water. At this time, they're ready to spawn, so by raising the temperature of the water, adding extra food to the water, conditions are pretty much perfect for them to spawn.
The next stage is larval development. During this time, the clam transforms from egg form to a small clam with a shell. In the hatchery, this process takes place in large tanks.
The water is warmed. It's enriched with cultured phytoplankton, cultured algae, and on a regular basis, the water is changed. The small clams, as larvae, are separated from the water. Put fresh water back in, then the tank is washed out. Fresh water, fresh seawater is put back in. More algae is put back in, and then the larval clams go back in the tank.
After 15 to 20 days, the larvae have transformed into juvenile clams. In all practical appearances, microscopic versions of adult clams. They now enter a period of rapid growth. Consequently, they need more room and a way to supply large amounts of algae for growth. The hatchery has two separate methods of achieving this growth. The first is an upwelling system. Clams are placed in a screen in concentrated amounts. Water is then upwelled through the clams at a high rate. This provides dense amounts of food for growth, as well as carrying waste products away. The problem is that 150 gallons per minute need to pass through the clams. This can incur high costs in electricity to run a water pump. An alternative method is to place the clams in floating trays. Approximately 10,000 clams are placed in a window screen-sized tray. As they float in salt inlets or ponds, the tidal flow carries off the waste products and supplies algae to the clams. The drawback is it's not as concentrated a feeding procedure as the upweller, causing the clams to grow at a slower rate. But it is more cost-efficient. In approximately 2 to 3 months, the floating tray could conceivably be filled with clams 3/8 to 5/8 of an inch long. It is at this stage that the clams are ready for seeding in a mudflat.
The straightforward phase is spawning the clams and rearing them as larvae. The least straightforward and most experimental is actually the seeding of the clams on the flats.
You're ending up just throwing these clams out, just almost as if it was grass seed, all right? And you try not to squish them, and you try not to get too many in one small spot.
The seeding and the success of the seeding depends on the initial size of the clams. The larger the clam that you can put on the flat, the less chance of mortality will occur.
Due to a short neck, a small clam cannot dig deep enough into the mud to escape predation by small crabs and shrimp which walk along the mud. To help prevent predation and ensure the survival of the newly seeded clams, a protective mesh is laid over the seeded area. Some areas have no protection. Others have a single layer of mesh protection. And yet other areas have a double layer of mesh protection. The results of this experiment will determine how much emphasis will be put on mesh protection in the future. Looking past the technology, the unique ingredient is still the local involvement in the project and what effect it will have on the clam digger in Down East Maine.
The only thing I've got at stake is when they dig these, I'll be able to buy them. Right now, I can't buy them because nobody's digging any.
Initially, the towns donated a fee to be included in the project, but there have been other contributions as well. Richard Carver of Beals Island donated the use of this building to house the actual hatchery. There have also been varying contributions of equipment and manpower from local citizens. However, after years of work to improve the productivity of their clam flats, there is still plenty of apprehension about whether this venture will succeed.
People that dig clams are sick and tired of of being on the losing stick, the losing end of the battle. And they seem to always be fighting an uphill war. If you've been in it for 30 or 40 years, you tend to look at things negatively because nothing really has worked well. It's been somewhat frustrating in that the commitment didn't carry over as much as I had hoped that it would to the actual seeding of the flats.
The first year that they see a difference in the amount of clams they're digging and the amount of money they're putting in the pocket, that'll be the first year they'll say, you know, whoopee for the clam hatchery.
They're really impressed that we grew them to begin with. You know, they like what Brian did in the hatchery and Craig and the crew. And being able to go in there and say, here they are, you know, run your fingers through them and there's the clam. But it's this next step. They want to see something in their pockets from it.
I don't know of very many situations where technology has been applied to a commercial resource development situation that has made a big impact in the wild fishery, okay? And if it does, in this case, you're going to have most of the communities that are managing their clam flats up and down the coast wanting to become involved in some clam flat enhancement program.
One could already say that this project is successful because we accomplished our goal that we set a year ago. We produced 6 million clams. Now the next level that one has to look at is whether it works in the field or not. And that's really the level at which everyone should be looking at and judge the project by. Clam diggers will have an opportunity to dig hatchery-reared seed in the summer of 1990.
This spring, Brian Beal and his crew will return to the seeded flats to check the progress of his hatchery clams. Vantage Point will let you know then how they've fared through the winter. I think if you asked anyone beyond a 3-block radius of the Blaine house how